Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ian Proud. I am the Peacemonger. Today is Monday, the 23rd of February in the afternoon. And I'm pleased to welcome Jeff Meyerhoff to the show today. Jeff has had a varied career, including in psychiatric social work. He got his economics degree at Tufts way back when, and he approached me to appear on the show as a guest. And I was more than delighted to except he wanted to talk about propaganda. So it seems a perfectly apposite subject to discuss. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's great to be here. It's surreal.
Hopefully not too surreal. Um, so before we came online, you're talking about sort of growing up and your eyes being opened, if you like, by Noam Chomsky. I wonder if you could tell us a bit about that journey.
Uh, yeah. Well, as I had said, always was confused about U.S. foreign policy because it seemed contradictory that the United States wants to create goodness and democracy, and yet the results overwhelmingly seem to be um, the smashing of democracies or very weak democracies or infiltrating democracies or establishing dictatorships and death squads and secret police. And that seemed to run counter to the noble ideals. And the usual excuse when you bring this up for the person who still believes in the good intentions is that we make mistakes. So we have good intentions, and when we do bad, it's a mistake we made. Um, but that explanation seems so flimsy because the bads, there's such a powerful pattern of bads. If you look at Stephen Kinzer's book Overthrow, the series of overthrows. And so these two forces, knowing the US wants to do good and the fact that it's not doing good in a patterned way was created an enormous contradiction. I couldn't mediate it. But then I read Chomsky, Towards a New Cold War was a series of essays, but also Manufacturing Consent, which he wrote with Edward Herman. And it gave you a model for understanding why the United States speaks or has the rhetoric of all these high intentions. It's because they serve the purposes of power and gaining what you want uh, without regard to the bulk of the population of those other countries. And so, the contradiction got resolved because one side was an illusion. The idea that the intention is always to do good was an illusion, and that there was actually this radical critique that you could make using reason, evidence, and morality to see the world in a wholly different way. And I've found over the last 40, 45 years that it really works until I found this alternative Western expert cohort of which you are a part of. Ambassador Chaz Freeman, Professor Mearsheimer, that whole gang, it's about 40 or 50 Western people. And I realized, wow, I mean, there are two realities going on. I read the Apple Newswire in the morning and I see the mainstream reality. And then I watch all these YouTube people, Mearsheimer, Ian Proud, Larry Johnson, and and it's a evidence-based, rational, moral arguments for an entirely different view, which means the mainstream largely is fabricating an illusion for certain purposes of power, and that you have to read the mainstream news to decipher what is actually going on. Whereas most people, I think, read their news. Um, they think their news source is a window, and they read their New York Times and then they learn what's happening, and that's what's happening. But you have to read so much more critically to be able to understand what's happening because it can be the very reverse of what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. And because I think any policy, whether it's domestic policy, foreign policy, economic policy, is always an act of judgment. You know, a judgment that one course of action is preferable to another course of action. But it's a judgment that should be rooted in facts and rational analysis, as you say. And people can disagree on the judgment, given the facts, before them. But I suspect, or I fear, that a lot of policy is judgment without facts. They just
Right,
take
right.
away the rational analysis, and they're left with judgment. And the question is how they get there. I mean, how are they preconditioned to get there? I mean, how do you think, why do you think that the American and the British government system is essentially no different? It's predisposed to have certain judgments of the world in terms of its foreign policy kind of posture.
Well, I think it has to do with the power structure and where you're placed in the power structure and what are the demands on you and what do you perceive as your interests. So the people at the top have might have very different interests than the lower level intelligence analysts. Dick Cheney in 2002, he didn't want to hear anything about Iraq that wasn't going to support his project of creating a war because he is looking to dominate. And I guess it has to do with how the power structure is put together and what the interests of the top people are versus the bottom people are. The bulk of the population might have a very different interest than the elite and the leaders who have their own agenda, maintaining power, winning, getting a win. The Biden people used to say, getting a win. Um, and so I guess it's the nature of the social structure, the power structure, and what your interest is, depending on where you are in the power structure.
Yeah. But see, even there, I think any country only really has three kind of broad interests. You can subdivide it and you can describe it in different ways. But for any country, and I think actually when you zero in, it's kind of pretty much the same for ordinary people. Is one is security, to feel safe, within your boundaries, that your home is safe, your territory is safe and free from attack. Two is for your people to feel safe and secure, to protect them from harm. And the third is to ensure quality of life, prosperity, sort of economic success for the nation as a whole and for individual people within that. And beyond that, it's hard to really see any interests that any country has outside of that. And yet, foreign policy increasingly doesn't seem to be lodged in any kind of concrete way to interests, although people talk about interests all the time without necessarily knowing what they mean. So I think the whole interest thing gets deeply, deeply confused. And again, that links to the point about rational analysis of policy. That any policy analysis should start from interests, and yet it's not clear that anybody in Washington D.C. or for that matter in Whitehall in London, are really focused on that. They're focused on something else, and I can't, I don't. Maybe you can help me understand. I don't understand what that something else is, because having a different regime in having a pro-Western regime in Ukraine, isn't really serving any of our interests really. I don't think our economic interests, our keeping our people safe interests, or our kind of keeping our territory secure interests, and yet we still do it. So I mean, what's the missing thing? What am I missing?
Um, well, the neocon ethos that seems to be in control, mostly in control in America, seems to want to win and dominate. And that there seems to be some need, I mean, for their security needs, the elite, they seem to think they need to keep dominating other powers. So you have to smash Russia or you have to smash Iran because we're on the road to smashing China. Now, I think there's something pathological. It's like I mean, you might want to use social psychology, that there's something sociopathic that you find your security as an elite person in dominating the threat to your elite status. You want to be on top. You want America to be on top. If the other guy is going to be on top, then you think that your interests are going to sink and that you're not going to get what you want. You might lose your position, your honor, your sense of yourself, your class's sense of yourself. And so um, and then there's also just economic interest. I mean, like the people around Zelensky are making a bundle off of this war. I mean, the 20% of the aid that comes in is being siphoned off corruptly, just like in Afghanistan and Iraq. Um, and so that's a massive financial interest. And you can see that Trump, for himself and for his class, they want to accumulate, accumulate, accumulate. It's almost as if for the American elites, um, there's not enough wealth inequality.
Hmm.
It doesn't matter that it's obscene. Why can't we have it be doubly obscene?
Let's
And
create it in
so
other countries.
creating other countries?
No, let's create wealth inequality in other countries.
Right, right. We got to use them to have more wealth inequality, which was kind of the American model or the IMF World Bank model for a lot of the third world. How can we immiserate them, have a kind of corrupt elite within there in that country, and then how do we, the international elite, how do we benefit from extracting stuff from them? If you're interested in accumulating more, which is a very capitalist value, accumulating more, that's built into the system. You're going to want to exploit as much as possible people, which, unfortunately leaves 80% of the population in dire, dire straits.
Yeah, I'd say it's more than 80%, to be honest, certainly in the case of Ukraine. But I mean, certainly, I think that analysis helps to explain why elites in recipient countries like Ukraine, recipients of neoconservatism, why they like war because that they accumulate wealth, through it, despite the immiseration of their people. It still doesn't explain why the kind of donor, the US, the UK, still push it, in my view. Although I still accept the kind of the whole elite power structure, but I struggle to kind of connect that with what why you can't have that within your own countries and you still want to impose it on other countries. Peace, if that makes sense. But part of me kind of wonders whether it's something about, and it's something I touched on a bit when I was talking to people who live in Asia, whether it's the Anglo-Saxon sensibility or the kind of Christian, if you like, sensibility. The US being probably on the more religious side of the equation when it comes to formal observance of faith, within society, compared, for example, to the UK. Yeah, I wonder whether part of it is this kind of missionary zeal as well. Conquering the great unwashed and imposing us. It's almost a neo-colonial, if that makes sense, but with a kind of Christian dimension to it. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah,
what is.
this reminds me of something Ambassador Chaz Freeman, who's part of this alternative network, who's an extraordinary person, really something. He kind of disagrees, he said, with Professor Mearsheimer about the kind of realist view of political theory that all countries do the same thing. And China is going to be trying to gain power and dominate too. But Ambassador Freeman said, well, he was stationed in China. He speaks Mandarin. He knows the history. He says, for 2000 or whatever years, that really hasn't been how they've operated. They've operated in a very different way from the Western powers, that colonialism, the exploitation, really bringing Christianity and forced capitalism into the countries and then doing hideous things to people like the Congo, the Belgians in the Congo, you'd make you retch if you knew what they did there. But he's saying that the whole Chinese history was different. They obviously have skirmishes on their borders. They're the hegemon, and Vietnam has to know that, and the Koreans have to know that, and there has to be a measure of respect. But they're not sending out missionaries and armies to, take over Afghanistan and take over Pakistan and take over and then be there and dominate them. And I think even in the foreign policy of something like China right now, I mean, the economic policy, the way I read it is that they're very different from the Americans. I mean, they obviously, the Chinese want to get the best deal for themselves when interacting in Africa. Of course, that's capitalism. And you'll use your advantage to get a better deal for yourself, of course. But they're not, you know, having their secret service infiltrate the media in these countries and then set up pay politicians and set them up and then restructure the democracy or the non-democracy or create a dictatorship of their own. And so it's a very different model of promoting yourself or working in the world to promote your interests. So
Yeah.
there's a stark difference, and it would be an interesting comparison between the more aggressive Western model with that Christian spear point and the Chinese model, which has been very different.
Yeah, no, I agree with that actually, and so therefore I'm very much on the side of Freeman, even though I sort of agree with Professor John Mearsheimer on most things. I mean, there
Right.
speaketh a diplomat, right? Somebody who's actually lived in a different culture and has studied it, compared to a professor, a very learned professor who studied um, political theories on whiteboards and in sort of lecture rooms. I think when you get under the skin of a country, you see difference. And I happen to think that the Chinese have a much longer term mindset, and we don't. We have a very short term sort of mindset, very immediate kind of mindset. We see evil, we want to kind of challenge it now. If that makes sense. Whereas the Chinese kind of play the like the Zhou Enlai famous quote, when asked, "What did you think of the French Revolution?" His reply
Oh,
was, "It's too early to tell."
right. Right. And think about it. Like, what if somebody in America proposed a 5-year plan, a 5-year economic plan? We
Yeah,
would
right.
we would laugh at them. It would be a joke. If for the Chinese or the Russians, well, a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan. Like
Yeah,
that sounds like a great idea. We should have something like that as long as it's a good plan. But the fact that we don't have such a thing is evidence of what you're saying, that there's a wholly different cultural mindset for the Chinese, the long game.
yeah, yeah. I think that's where politics and strategy collide. Certainly in Washington D.C., which I've obviously been to many times. I flew back on the night of 9/10, the night before 9/11, flew into
Whoa.
London Heathrow on the morning of 9/11. I'd been in the Pentagon, for example. I've been to Langley. I've been to other places, to talk about Indonesia, bizarrely. So it's a city that I really love. But I mean, politically, it's kind of a hotbed of short-termism.
Right.
Everybody competing for some bullet point press line soundbite, in today's kind of key topic, and very few people actually thinking long term. And I think actually one of the things I'm not saying um, I favor or don't favor kind of Trump, but I get the impression that he thinks he has a strategy, quite a radical strategy for completely reorienting the US economy. Whether he's sincere about that, of course, is another matter, given his attachment to all the oligarchs, in the US and so on. But he seems to
Yeah.
have a plan to gradually de-dollarize and, make the US an industrial powerhouse at a time when globalization is on the retreat, right? I mean, that's
Right.
almost kind of natural cyclical thing to do, it seems to me, to kind of retrench, reindustrialize. And that's one of the reasons he probably wants to kind of nab assets from Greenland and Venezuela and that
Mm.
sort of thing too, possibly. But and he seems to have a plan, but he can't break out of the politics. He cannot. He's strangled on a daily basis by the politics of the Beltway.
Right.
And
But he also, oh, I'm sorry.
go ahead, go ahead.
But he also accentuates it. I mean, all of these alternative Western expert analysts that you're a part of, one of the refrains is that there is no strategy. They're flying by the seat of their pants. So you're right. There we can put together a larger economic plan, but how much of it is rhetoric and propaganda to serve other purposes. Um, if he wants to reindustrialize America and he's going to use the tariffs but have no industrial policy to work with the tariffs, it's a joke. The tariffs are actually for Trump a stick. He needs a weapon. And he wants to wield that weapon just any way he wants. And so he'll use the tariffs. And you can use the cover story that I really care about deindustrialization. But we should know that that's bullshit. Because even if you did have new industry, those jobs aren't going to pay well without unions. I mean,
Yeah,
before unions, manufacturing jobs were hard, were bad, really tough. Does Trump have this industrial policy to go along with the tariffs?
yeah,
No, no, the tariffs are just, I'm going to hit you, India, or Brazil. I don't like you prosecuting Bolsonaro, so I'm going to hit you. I mean,
yeah,
it's stepping outside of anything I mean, it's just blatant mobsterism.
yeah. No, I agree. I'll come on to mobsterism in a minute. It's almost like he imagines the free hand of economics will just automatically create industry on the back of tariffs, which of course it won't be A, because as you say, there's no industrial strategy, and B, because the people being tariffed will reciprocate with their own tariffs, and they'll essentially kind of be mutually assured destruction in tariff terms. So
Right, and it seems like Trump's super narcissism doesn't allow him to imagine himself into the mind and interests of the other.
yeah,
He doesn't have the capacity to think about the other. And just yesterday there was this Steve Witkoff, the special envoy, who's a real estate developer. Um, he was saying that Trump's confused. Why won't the Iranians capitulate?
yeah,
He doesn't
yes,
get it. He doesn't understand. Why aren't they capitulating? And we, who actually know something, we can tell you, Trump, but if that's not propaganda, he doesn't know. He's living
yeah,
in a different world.
yeah. Last time I checked, uh, uh, I was quickly looking up on my very fancy phone. Um, the population of Iran is about 83 million, isn't it? No,
I
no, it's
thought,
91.5 million people.
right, people are saying 92 million.
Yeah, 92 million people. I mean, and I'll come on to Witkoff in a minute, but I mean, Trump has deployed what on the surface appears to be a formidable kind of armada, but it's not that formidable when you compare it to what Colin Powell had at his disposal in the first Gulf War, which he said even then wasn't enough. Which he dominated with overwhelming force, with four carrier strike groups supported by a much bigger UK Navy than we have now. He said he wanted five carriers. He had 600,000 troops on the ground in Saudi Arabia, massing up and all the rest of it. And Trump has got a couple of carrier strike groups, one of which has been on continual deployment for well over a year, and all of the sailors on board are completely knackered and missing their families. So
Right,
it's like,
right.
what does he hope to do? I mean, and you see the occasional kind of and the BBC love this too. We love our propaganda in the UK as well. Oh, there's been a protest. Students are protesting at a city. Okay, I mean, this is a country of 92 million people. I mean, okay, we have protests outside of the UK Parliament every single day of the year. And that is democracy. By the way, I'm not calling Iran a democracy. I don't necessarily think that it is. But I mean, we have this all the time and we embrace it and we value it as part of our so-called democracy. You get a BBC cameraman picturing some students demonstrating outside of a university in some random city in Iran, and that's all hell's breaking loose. The regime's going to fall apart tomorrow. I mean, it's just what is Trump trying to achieve?
Well, I think he's caught, and there's just so many competing interests. It's possible, this is maybe a little too far afield, but it's possible that the lack of buildup of U.S. forces is part of his ambivalence. He 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 has to strike, but he doesn't want to strike. And if Iran follows through with a full-scale retaliation, Trump can't do his little tap. He can't do his little deal, but he can't withdraw. So he's caught. And maybe the smallness of the buildup has something to do with that. I've heard people saying, I don't know, I want to hear from the experts, but they said that the buildup is similar to what we had in the last summer against the Houthis. I've heard. I'm not sure that's accurate, and it certainly didn't work out well with the Houthis. And yet it's somehow this buildup is going to, do the trick in Iran.
Yeah, again, I kind of think, and this is a kind of a position that quite a few people posit that actually if he was serious, he'd go harder. But I'm not sure he's got the capabilities to do so anyway, militarily, despite the 1 trillion yearly budget of the Ministry of War, Department of War. That he's going in soft because he doesn't really want to strike. But that's again to me rings of him actually just managing the beltway, and managing the lobby rather than making rational policy judgments.
Exactly.
Because Trump trashed the JCPOA. I mean, it's him that kind of trashed the JCPOA way back, in his first term. And now he wants the Iranians to make a deal. I mean, they had a deal. And everybody, the Chinese, the Russians, the Europeans, and actually the Obama administration, thought it was a good deal. Rouhani was brought in from the cold, the then Prime Minister. He was at Davos, everybody's courting him, people were talking about investing in Iran, sanctions being removed, and that sort of thing. Trump trashed it. He just,
Right.
what sort
Right.
of deal is he expecting to get now? I mean, yeah. So and you look at Russia, and you look at Iran, of course, and whenever any foreign power comes in and threatens you with military action, it mobilizes popular support around the authorities.
Right.
You
Right.
know, I think the idea that most Iranians are going to rise up against the regime, just because Trump has got his flotilla out in the Gulf, I think is a fantasy. It really is.
Right.
And
It's belied by what happened in June in the summer, which they had enormous um, crowds and rallying around the country and the flag and the whole thing, which is what you'd expect. But that kind of information, which is obvious to us, Trump may not have that. And the neocons around him don't want to think that. They have to think that it's on the regime, the Iranian regime, the Iranian state is on the verge of collapse. You can't you can't justify this horrific intervention if the government is strong. So
yeah,
it has to be weak in order to continue the aggressive policy, the smashing of Iran as a gateway to weakening China and Russia. Um,
yeah. But again,
and
again,
also,
it can. Sorry, carry on.
uh, also just in terms of the JCPOA and the fact that the Iranians mostly followed it with inspections, that's translated now into the Iranians break every treaty and they always lie. That's the propaganda. They break every treaty and they always lie and they can't be trusted. And people, most people in America have to absorb this demonology of the enemy. And they may not know, or they wonder, they don't quite understand. And yet, most Americans don't want us attacking Iran.
Yeah, I've got a friend, stroke associate, ex MI6, and he's fixated by Iran. He says it's such a great country. He says all it needs is a new regime.
Ah,
It's- oh my goodness, here we go again. And it's just going to really be. It's really dangerous because what happens if they put a hypersonic missile into an aircraft carrier in the Gulf? What does Trump do then? I mean, he's got no option but to go in harder, right? I mean, he's painted himself into a corner. You know,
right.
you know.
And will the American people, when soldiers start dying, Iranians kill 500, 1,000. I wonder, will the American populace get bloodthirsty and we got to get them? Or is it like, Trump, what the hell are you doing? Why did you attack? And because the populace, it's not like 2002 with 70% of the population of America gung-ho on attacking poor little Iraq, you've got a majority of the population who doesn't like the war yet. Will the blood of American soldiers turn them into rabid, anti-Iranians, or will they blame Trump? Or will it
Well,
be
I
a
don't.
mix,
I
a
mean,
battle?
yeah. I mean, I've been to the US many times. It's a country that I love. I won't claim to know American people, that well, or compared to any other people for that matter, including British people. But I mean, back in 2002, it was still in the shadows of 9/11. That
Right,
absolutely gut-wrenching, event, world-changing event that itself led to all sorts of atrocities, around the world. Of course, in vengeance, again, back to the Christianity bit of that analysis, that doesn't exist here. You can't claim October the 7th. I mean, that's Israel's tragedy, and it was a tragedy,
right,
a terrible tragedy for them, undoubtedly
right,
so. But I mean, that was their tragedy, not America's. I mean, you just don't have that. You don't have that driving logic, that event, that tragedy to kind of
right.
evoke those sorts of emotions. It seems to me from ordinary people. They'll say, "Well, what about? I thought you're going to be building tire factories and steel plants. Why should we care about this? I mean, that's just my sense. What do
Right.
you think?
Well, I think there's that, the post 9/11, that's powerful, right? But also Bush and Cheney and the whole gang there, the henchmen, it was 18 months to 2 years of propaganda, preparation, manipulating intelligence, roping in the major media. All the major media in the US, except for the Knight Ridder news service, were gung-ho for war. And he had to they had to lay the groundwork of propaganda and lies in order to be able to justify this enough, even with 9/11. You got the strength of 9/11. Trump, how much work has Trump done to lay the groundwork for an attack on Iran? Has he been spending 2 years with a Dick Cheney-like demon who's really manipulating behind the scenes with the media to create a reality, a pseudo environment for the American people to believe that something is true when it's an illusion. So it's another difference between the 2002, 2003 versus today, and I
Yeah.
think it shows a kind of deterioration um, that Trump doesn't even have to bother anymore with prepping the population to attack.
Yeah, I don't know why. I mean, apart from the attachment to the Israel lobby that John Mearsheimer talks about a lot, um, why he's bothering to just foment further unrest in the Middle East, which is already a very kind of difficult region to put it mildly. And I think I always because we in Europe have the problem of the war in Ukraine, which all of the elites want to continue, despite 2 million people having been killed or injured. All this comes back to not actually thinking about the interests of your people in your own countries.
Yes.
European citizens have been immiserated by rising costs of living,
Mm,
fear of World War III warmongering, being held over their heads every day to justify the continuance of the war, which is a logical loop which I find difficult to kind of connect, to be honest. But it's the same in the US, right? I mean, don't I mean Trump was elected to make people's ordinary people, working class people's lives, better. And in none of this do you hear about that or about how this will help. You kind of your blue collar workers in Pennsylvania, for example, which is a obviously a very contested ground, in the presidential vote. I mean, you never hear about this, and it's the same in Europe. You never hear about what ordinary people want, um, which raises questions about the quality of democracy itself, right? Um,
right, right. But regarding Iran and why the US would want to smash Iran, people are talking about some of the experts, alternative experts say, "Oh, Israel's driving the whole thing. Israel tells Trump what to do and then he does it." And there's an element of that. But isn't it, is, aren't we, hasn't it been for 30 years? The neocon vision was to smash states. I mean, of course, they wanted to create democracy, but the actual result, Afghanistan, Libya, Iraq, um, uh, Gaza, Syria, the result is smashing states. And if you smash Iran, then China is weakened. Russia is weakened. So in terms of the US neocon vision, and was formulated in the 90s, they want to smash those states. They think it's in the interest of the United States or the US elites. So in that way of thinking about it, we are using Israel. But in the other way of Israel's using us. So it really depends on which model you're using. And I had a vision of Trump, and he has a pit bull or an aggressive dog. I don't want to demonize pit bulls. They're wonderful dogs. He has an aggressive dog, and it's like it's pulling on the leash and it wants to attack, right? So it's Israel is kind of pulling to attack, but Trump, the US, actually should have complete control, but it's allowing itself to be drawn by the attack dog. And the master is saying, the master could use their leverage and stop this, but maybe the master kind of wants the attack dog to devour the leg of somebody and destroy somebody. So I think you really have to be much subtler in understanding who's running these shows. Because there is this powerful argument for why the US, well, the sick US, the neocon US, why they would want to smash Iran. And
Yeah.
they're eager for it.
Yeah, the attack dog we have here is Zelensky. And
Right,
and
right.
there's a strong case to be made actually that for a long time he was the marionette. He was the tool that the Americans in particular, but also the British, were pulling the strings of. Getting into ramping up the NATO rhetoric after Biden came to power again. In 2021, leading to war in February 2022. But
Right,
he's now become the puppet master. It seems to me he's kind of flipped that role.
right,
He particularly, especially since the Americans have departed stage left.
right. And because the Europeans have shown that they have to have this war. They've got to have Ukraine as a proxy smashing Russia. They don't see any other way, which puts them in a great disadvantage relative to Zelensky. He gains control because of their bizarre, excessive need to have the war continue so that we can smash Russia. And that gives him this extra power to cut the strings of the marionette.
Yeah, yeah. What and attach new strings to Mark Rutte, to Ursula von der Leyen, Kaja Kallas, Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron, Friedrich Merz, and others.
It's an incredible crew. I remember Ambassador Freeman was calling them the coalition of the deluded,
Yeah, a
as
friend of
opposed
mine.
to
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a good. I think that's a good one. Good friend of mine, Commodore Steve Jeremy, he's an ex-military guy.
oh yeah,
He coined a phrase, coalition of the lemmings. Maybe we should come up with a new kind of whole lexicon of coalitions that that try to describe these people.
right.
They're being led to the cliff happily and are ready to
Right.
jump.
That would be the non-propaganda term for them.
Yeah, it all comes back to propaganda, though, right?
Right.
That the manufacturing of consent, if we kind of bring it all back to Noam Chomsky.
Right.
That there's this daily struggle to manufacture consent, and that struggle's getting harder. I think that's the truth, right? I think that is the truth. But back in the 70s, back in the 60s, right,
Hmm.
during the Vietnam War, when you just
Right.
had TV shows and newspapers, the news cycle was slower, much slower. People's access to information was much, much slower than it is now, where
Right.
it's instant, right? You know, and I think that is changing the game. In terms of that ability to kind of manufacture consent. There's the
Mhm. Yeah.
velocity is slower because you're fighting against the fact that people can look up information for themselves, including, of course, on alternative media, but not just there. Um,
Right.
and I
And
think,
the
go
oh, sorry.
ahead.
The prime example is this 180 on Israel. I
Yeah,
grew up in Israel in the United States was sacrosanct. I mean, it was just amazing the monolithic support for them. And now, because of the social media, TikTok, the whole thing, this massive switch, and it's just amazing. And yet they can still be prosecuting the death and the destruction in the midst of it. But and now, actually, with Larry Ellison buying TikTok and trying to control CBS News, the APAC or the Israel people are realizing we got to get control of this new media or we're going to be sunk because how that in the US they actually think Israel is a pariah. I mean, it's an unbelievable switch. And it's for just what you said about losing control of the propaganda, the media, because reality is starting to come through. So there's that democratic aspect of social media. Um,
yeah, no, exactly right. I remember there's a Foreign Office project to give people in Africa mobile phones to film human rights abuses, to kind of democratize kind of media and evidence against acts of oppression, which again hashtag discuss. But yeah, and that is why kind of when we talk about the kind of short termism of how the policy process works, I think there is a longer term shift in politics and democracy happening in Western societies, driven by people's more rapid access to information and media, from different sources, even from mainstream sources, because even in mainstream sources, people see bad things happening in Gaza, in Ukraine, and now Iran, and they say, well, not in my name. I mean, why are we doing that? Even when they see the propaganda, they're not convinced by it. And I think that, so that longer term shift in how people think about foreign policy, is kind of drifting away from interventionism, it seems to me, and more towards nationalism, but not in a hostile kind of far right sense, but more in a kind of why can't we focus on our country's interests first? Rather than
right.
fomenting foreign conflicts. That's you see that certainly see that in Europe, where reform is on the rise. I'm still not sure what I think about reform, to be perfectly honest, as somebody who grew up overseas and fundamentally curious about people from every country and walk of life myself. I'm still not sure what I think about reform, but I mean they kind of fit within that pattern of people moving away from just wanting permanent globalism and wars for no obvious benefit. Certainly no benefit to them. And I don't think the mainstream political elite, the kind of the the academic elite or the kind of media elite have really recognized that shift is happening. And I think that is why governments are going to be tumbling over the next decade or so towards something much more moderate. I mean, that maybe that's more aspiration than reality, but I mean that's certainly my aspiration and hope. But I do looking at the evidence, I do see that trend sort of happening, and I think for now it may well be cyclical. In 50 years we,
Hmm.
we may come back to more globalism with the rise of China and so on.
Right.
Let's see. But for now, I think that the cycle is moving towards anti-interventionism.
Right. You might call it a healthy isolationism.
Healthy isolationism. Yes, this is a very good term, Jeff. I like this a lot.
Let's market it. We can turn it into propaganda.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Healthy isolationism, or just political debate, right? I mean, because there's a difference, right? I mean, it comes back to the point I made at the start. Any policy is judgment based on the facts and the evidence available. If healthy isolationism is our proposal based on the evidence that we see before us, then it's not propaganda. It's our judgment, and people can debate with us on that, right? It's propaganda when you ignore the facts, and you sort of dig your head, in the sand anyway. I mean, that's the difference, I think, right?
Right, definitely. I was joking, but what was the joke? Because the distinction you make between propaganda and proper examination of evidence and listening to alternative views and asking critical questions, those are real methods and techniques that we could teach and people could actually use if they could gain the power that they really should have. And they are that rational sticking to reason and with a moral emphasis and argumentation is the counter to propaganda, which doesn't care about any of that. It just uses reason and facts instrumentally. It doesn't care about fact or reason. It
Yeah.
uses everything. Morality, law are
Well,
all
well,
just
well
instrumental
I would
tools.
argue that it creates reason and facts. Um, you
What
know,
does?
well, the neocons, the propagandists, that they
Well,
actually create facts, and hence you get into the sphere of disinformation, where
right.
and actually misinformation. Where I think the BBC certainly pushes misinformation on a daily basis. For example, and in some cases disinformation. All the stuff about
Hmm.
the Russian army need to kind of recycle washing machine parts to get their tanks working, and the latest one was Russia's losing 27 times more troops every day than Ukraine, for example. I mean, this
Right.
disinformation. This is manufactured. This is manufactured facts to manufacture consent.
Right.
So,
And it's the reason that we needed to develop the word factoid.
yeah. Well, yeah, indeed, indeed. Uh,
Propaganda creates factoids,
yeah,
whereas real scholars and people who are seriously investigating using the proper methods of science and reason and criticality, they create facts.
yeah. I mean, a factoid should really be extended to fact devoid.
Oh my
Anyway,
God.
we're rocking it here, Jeff. I tell
Yeah,
you.
we're developing the terms. These are going to work. These are
Yeah,
going to
well,
work
we're
in the
gonna we're gonna
public
have to write a
sphere.
book on this at some point.
Okay.
Well, that was really good discussion. Thanks so much. Certainly,
Uh,
very for me. I find it personally find it very kind of thought provoking. I mean, at heart, it comes back to kind of the essentially short termist nature of how policy processes work and how people are captured by elites. To kind of drive agendas that are deleterious to the interests of ordinary people. And this to go back to the kind of Chaz Freeman point, this assumption that every other kind of state in the world, uses the same kind of framework for its foreign policy choices that we do. And that if we're only bigger than they are, then we will prevail in sort of quite a binary way, whatever the morality of our actions, which is ultimately kind of really false kind of approach that is being revealed as people have more rapid access to kind of information, so they can take actual facts, not fact avoids, and come up with their own analysis. And long may that campaign of alternative media and real analysis continue. Jeff Meyerhoff, thank you
yeah.
so much for joining me today. For everybody who watched, I hope you found that as thought provoking as I did. Uh, Please comment or leave any questions in the chat, and like and subscribe to my channel as I'm still getting started. I'm only 6 weeks in, but I should be nudging towards 8,000 subscribers by the end of today. So thank you all so much for all the support you've given me so far. I appreciate every kind of like, every comment that you offer, including critical comments and some maybe not the insulting comments, but no, seriously, thank you all so much for your support wherever you are in the world, whatever your religion, your race, any aspect of how you decide to live your life. I wish you very much peace. And Jeff, thank you so much for joining today.
Well, thanks, Ian, and thank you for your work as a peacemonger. It's the world definitely needs it.
The world needs more peacemongers, that's for sure. Cheers, Jeff.